I'm never doing that again. After that whole fiasco, I started doom scrolling, trying to remind myself what year it was. Hey, big 25. I was in there a long time, let me tell you. Anyways, doom scrolling. I found what's going on in Venezuela. So I think best thing I can do is give you a quick synopsis of past and similar events. And then I'll get into the meat and potatoes of it all. So, anyways, the USS Maine, right, started construction in 1888, October, ended it in November of 1889. It was the first United States naval vessel to be named after the state of Maine. And just a few years after that, in 1895, the Cuban guerrillas of the Cuban Liberation Army would continue their uprising. Their main goal was to get independence from the Spanish on their home island. And to achieve this, they were using asymmetric warfare against the Spanish garrison held out there. Now, the Spanish decided it was best to move General Valeriano Weyler over to Cuba to try and quell the rebellion. They thought this because Weyler was well known for his brutal and inhumane tactics, which he would use against not only the Cuban civilian populace at that time, but also the Filipino populace back when he was the Governor General of there. Anyways, they made him into the Governor General of Cuba, in which then one of his first policies was the reconcentration policy. Now, the reconcentration policy sought to separate the Cuban civilians from the Cuban guerrillas. Weyler sought about doing this by moving the entire Cuban population into concentration camps. And if you know anything about concentration camps, they're some of the worst places in the world. That can't be stressed enough. These camps were ready to fall apart, disease was widespread, and famine was even more widespread due to Weyler's scorched earth policy implemented to try and starve out the Cuban populace from resisting. Keep that in mind. Now, the New York Journal and the New York Press, two prominent news organizations, well known for over-exaggerating a lot of their stories, which they unnecessarily did with Weyler's atrocities. You didn't have to do much to explain why that guy was a monster. But anyways, they talked about the crimes against humanity going on the Cuban island, and as such, that increased tensions between the United States and Spain. Now, it wasn't just the crimes against humanity why the United States had such a problem with Spanish action. They wanted the insurrection gone too. Granted, it wasn't because they were imperialist scum, it's because they were imperialist scum. See, the United States had $50 million worth of land investments on the island of Cuba at the time, and the insurrection was getting away a trade between the United States and Cuba. So it was mutually beneficial for them to find a resolution to this. Now, there were a lot of people who actually cared about the humanitarian effort that was needed on Cuba, but there's also a lot of rich bastards who cared more about money, really. They wanted to protect their investments on the island, so a war was seen as profitable. Now, 9:30 p.m., February 15th, 1898. The USS Maine is resting peacefully right next to the shore of Havana. While it's anchored, just 10 minutes later, a huge explosion would happen. No one quite knows the source of it. There's accounts from divers saying they found pieces of metal seeming to blown inward and damage done to the paint. And there was also a study done in 1911 claiming it was the brown and black powders that were stored in the forward magazine of the ship that led to the explosion. Seeing how the hull and deck made an airtight compartment just perfect for those gases to go off. Not entirely implausible, right? But we're not here to talk about the source of the Maine, we're here to talk about the result of it. The Spanish-American War of 1898 was a brief yet bloody one whose consequences were far worse. The war was mainly fought on the Philippines, Cuba, and various Caribbean islands. The first battle was that of the Battle of Manila, where Admiral George Dewey wiped the Spanish fleet occupied at Manila Bay. Following the Battle of Manila, Theodore Roosevelt's Rough Riders, and I believe the 9th and 10th Cavalry, I could be wrong, I'll put a quick flash on screen if I am, took part in the Battle of San Juan Hill on July 1st and captured the city of Santiago just a few days later. After that, Puerto Rico would fall to the Americans as well. Now, again, brief war, 113 days or just around 4 months. But this is the part where it gets interesting. You remember how the war was started for humanitarian efforts? Well, in the peace talks, Cuba would see its independence gained. Good thing. The Philippines, Puerto Rico, and those other Caribbean islands would be occupied. Oh, Guam too. Bad thing. Now, don't you think it would be best for these islands to have their independence guaranteed by America instead of them being occupied by America? Right, that's the common consensus. Well, it wasn't America's at the time. The United States occupied them, and the human rights whole thing was just completely forgotten about. A few years later, the Filipino-American War would begin, which would see things such as the Balangiga Massacre or the scorched earth tactics of the Samar campaign. Real mirror to the Spanish occupation of Cuba, no? And then following those, the Moro Rebellion would happen, which would see the Badajo Massacre. And, you know, they would say it was to get rid of the guerrilla fighters. Women and children were included in these massacres. They were not free from the horrors and the atrocities brought upon them by American troops. But thankfully, that's the only time America has ever been dragged into war due to bad information relating to an attack on a United States naval vessel. Right? So 1954 Vietnam, right? They just got out of war with France and gained their independence. They were split between the communist North and the capitalist South. Ooh, God, I love me some capitalism. I love some fucking freedom, some Coca-Cola, some Apple. Ooh. I say capitalist instead of democratic because the Ngo Dinh Diem regime was heavily autocratic, especially against those who were non-Christian. You ever seen that picture of the Buddhist monk who set himself on fire? That was due to the Diem regime. Diem's heavy, brutal, and all around just murderous suppression of non-Christian people it's close to a genocide, if not a genocide. All right, but Diem wouldn't last long. In 1963, he would be overthrown by a military coup, which would only mean the non-Christian massacres wouldn't be carried out by him. 3 weeks later, though, the Kennedy assassination would follow. Now, both these nations, under new leadership, would see an increase of United States military presence within Vietnam. So prior to 1964, it was very common for the United States to help the South Vietnamese troops attack the Viet Minh in the north. One tactic they used was coastal raids. Two ships that were using this was the USS Maddox and the USS Turner Joy. Now, on August 2nd, 1964, the USS Maddox reported an attack from 3 Vietnamese torpedo boats. This attack did happen, I'll say that. But the only damage the USS Maddox sustained was 1 round from machine gun fire. What gets interesting is the attack on August 4th, 1964. Now, the USS Maddox and the USS Turner Joy both radioed in that they had been attacked by another North Vietnamese torpedo vessel. But they weren't. After countless investigations by the United States military and outside forces, they had determined that this attack never happened. Nevertheless, the attack on August 4th was constantly stressed within the Lyndon B. Johnson administration. Again, the same guy who would just have meetings while sitting on the toilet taking a crap, or just walk around swinging his dick in the Oval Office. Strange guy, don't know if it's the best to run our country, but who am I to say? That was over half a century ago. Now, this false attack that never happened, by the way, would lead to the Gulf of Tonkin resolution, which would increase American military presence within Vietnam, both South and North. I think the Vietnam War is best known for its war crimes, no? Like, when you think Vietnam, you think napalm, Agent Orange, killing civilians. And all of that happened. One event that comes to mind when I think about the Vietnam War is the My Lai Massacre. 16th of March, 1968. Charlie Company, 1st Battalion, 20th Infantry Regiment, 11th Brigade of the 23rd Infantry would conduct the My Lai Massacre. Now, the My Lai Massacre was conducted by 26 soldiers who entered the village of My Lai. After the massacre, hundreds of corpses were found burned and mutilated. Out of the 26 soldiers who participated, 1 would be sentenced. He would receive life imprisonment at first, which then would be reduced down to 3.5 years of house arrest. None of the other men would see a day in prison. This just goes on top of the other countless American war crimes committed during the Vietnam War, such as the use of chemical weapons, the burning and murder of civilians, using civilians to clear minefields, blowing up religious institutions, calling in air and artillery strikes on non-military targets. The list goes on and on. If I were to say every single war crime that was committed by America during the Vietnam War, we'd be here forever. Now, what I would like to mention is the after effects of it. Even though the Vietnam War ended, again, around half a century ago, the effects can still be seen. People are still experiencing cancer due to chemicals like Agent Orange. Children are born with defects due to 7.6 million tons of bombs being dropped in the southeast region. Many lay unexploded, ready to go off at the gust of wind. These still claim casualties to this day. Children are not safe to play in certain areas because America so ruthlessly bombed the region, all in the name of stopping communism. And they lost. Like, what the fuck? It was all for nothing. We sent a bunch of men forcibly to a place a lot of them couldn't point out on a map. And a lot of them died. And we gained nothing from it. Vietnam ended in the 1970s, but the scars still feel so fresh to many people. But thankfully, that's the last time an entire administration lied about an incident to plunge the country into war. And granted, this was only by 2 boats this time who made up that lie. It wasn't like an entire presidency was defined by a certain lie, which would see the country enter into a bloody war no one wanted us to be in. Right? Yeah, I don't even think I need to talk about Operation Iraqi Freedom, do I? Now that was like really recent. I grew up with Operation Iraqi Freedom just being the thing. Oh yeah, we just had troops in Iraq. We just had them in Afghanistan. We just had them fucking everywhere in the Middle East. George Bush lying about weapons of mass destruction to go out and try and topple an already collapsing regime, which then our goal turned to the various terrorist groups, some of which we funded. And then afterwards, when we would capture a city, we would give it to a local defense militia, which then we would go fight later on, recapture the city, and then we would give that city to another local defense militia. The cycle continued. Countless men died. More, far more than what were needed. None of them needed to die, actually. Not a single soul. But yet, we were there. And for what? Oil. Dick Cheney died recently. As of recording this, it's been 1 day since they snuffed the big dick. He was actually a really, really heavy oil investor. Funny enough, if you check his portfolio, he owned like 70% of this one oil company. I forgot, but I'll flash on screen real quick which oil company it is. So what lesson could we learn from these 3 incidents? The United States is not against lying to the entire American people and sending them to war in the name of profit or political motivation. Why am I saying this? Well, it's coming back to Venezuela. Now, October 26, 2025, Venezuela released a statement saying that it captured 5 mercenaries with ties to the United States government and the CIA. They also said that these mercenaries were plotting a false flag attack, most likely which would have occurred during the training exercise, which is taking place in Trinidad and Tobago right now. Now, earlier this year, President Trump authorized covert CIA operations within the Caribbean and Venezuela. He has also authorized the bombing of Venezuelan ships, claiming that they were carrying narcotics into the United States. Where's the proof, Donnie? Now, on top of that, the Gerald Ford aircraft carrier group has been moved into the Caribbean. That's a bit extreme for just a couple small ships, which can be blown up with 1 bomb, granted, which is what's fucking going on, carrying narcotics into the United States. Why would they need an aircraft carrier group so close in the area? I think the statement from Venezuela wraps all of this nicely in a tight, neat little bow. The CIA and United States government was planning a false flag attack. That's just my opinion, though. Now, I'd also like to mention President Trump dodged the Vietnam draft by claiming he had bone spurs. So clearly, he didn't want to go fight in his own Vietnam, but he has no problem causing another one for us. And it's not like he respects the men and women who would go out to go fight in something like that. In 2018, Donald Trump made a visit to Belleau Woods, to a military cemetery there, where statements were made that he called the Marines who valiantly gave their lives in that battle a bunch of suckers and losers for dying. That's not the words of someone who cares about his people or his own soldiers who would willingly go out to go fight for him. Those are the words of a coward and a fraud. Now, you may be asking yourself, oh, well, what does this mean? What do we do about this? Protest. Go resist. Do whatever you can to ensure nothing like this happens. I, for one, will not stand for another Vietnam. I will never support sending us to another war where we don't belong. And honestly, I think Marty Robbins put it best. Burn your draft card if you like. It's good to disagree.
That's a get acquainted communistic kiss. Now ain't I right? Ain't I right? Ain't I right? One politician said it would be nice to send some blood